Hey, yo, what is going on, guys? Got a brand new episode of Buy or Bust for you guys today. Today, we're going to be talking about Shang Chi Master of the 10 Rings. We're going to be going over some key synergies, counters, the good, the bad, 3 separate decks for this card, as well as the floor and the ceiling. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So in case you guys did not know, Shang Chi is going to be a 3-cost, 5-powered Series 5 card releasing on Tuesday with the ability Game Start. The 10 Rings starts in your hand. Which, this is, of course, what it looks like in-game, and unfortunately, it does take a draw. Think of the way Quicksilver interacts. That is exactly what is going to happen with Shang Chi Master of the 10 Rings as well. This card also has another ability, on reveal, unlock their potential. And you might be wondering, what exactly are the 10 Rings? And the 10 Rings are as follows. This is the first iteration of the 10 Rings. This is the 2-cost, 1-powered stat line. On reveal, give one of your other cards here plus 1 power. So this goes off one time. It is an on reveal, and this is before their potential is unlocked. Once their potential is unlocked, they become a 2-cost, 2-powered card with the ability end of turn, give your other cards here plus 1 power. So you have 3 other cards in this lane. The other 3 cards get plus 1 power at the end of turn from this card, which means it would work with Invisible Woman for steps. But this, of course, is after you've played out Shang-Chi and his on reveal goes off. Then this gets unlocked. I believe it should work in hand and on the board. I know for certain it's on the board, but it should work in hand as well. As we move on to some of the key synergies for this card, the first one I want to note is going to be Clea. Clea, of course, whenever she gains a point of power or additional points of power itself, you get the Flames of Faultine into your hand. So this is a good card to be able to give you some Clea value. Also, Maverick getting additional points of power is really good for setting up some of your later turn plays or following turn plays, depending on how you can set it up. And something like a Sebastian Shaw, I think in like a Surfer style deck, Sebastian Shaw, something like a Captain Carter, like those are just some primary set lines. Maverick here are cards that can just really get benefits from that end of turn ability or even that potential just on reveal single proc. And like I said, even something like a First Steps Invisible Woman, since it is an end of turn ability, all the cards in that lane would get an additional point of power. If the Shang-Chi's Master of the 10 Rings, of course, the 10 Rings are going to be unlocked potential, you know? So just kind of keep that in mind as some of those key synergies there too. Key counters, of course, are going to be something like a Deafening Chord, you know, hitting that 2-cost card on the board. Deafening Chord can just remove its text and afflict it with -1 power, and we're seeing a lot of Deafening Chord still at the moment. I bet if Deafening Chord also hits even the non-unlocked potential version of the 10 Rings, the regular on reveal version, that would make it so that the end of turn version wouldn't be able to happen too, because I think its text is removed immediately. But I could be wrong there. I could totally be wrong. But I would think that would be the way this works. Next, of course, we do have good old Red Guardian. Red Guardian being able to target the 10 Rings because, of course, originally they are a 2-1. That's going to be a low-powered card for Red Guardian to be able to target and also remove its text and afflict it with a -2 as well. And then something like a Shadow King, the cards in that lane, of course, are getting like permanent power instead of like an ongoing power. So Shadow King would mitigate them back to their original base power. And even something like Ghost, because it's an end of turn ability for the unlocked 10 Rings, Ghost would also remove the text of the end of turn card. Next, as we talk about the good for Shang-Chi, when Shang-Chi is played and the 10 Rings are able to have their potential unlocked, there is a very high power ceiling for this card then. Be able to give all the other cards in that lane plus 1 power end of turn is something nothing to scoff at. I would say, because you can gradually just continue to just exceed, exceptional amounts of power, especially if it's something like a Clea or like a Carter or a Maverick. Like, especially those are like 3 of those main cards. Getting additional juice from that can give you just at least win that lane, or give you opportunities to win other lanes too, whether it's getting your Maverick big enough to be able to proc other cards later on, or whether it's being able to get Clea procced multiple times to be able to get lots of Flames of Faultine in order to afflict a lot of negative power onto your opponent's cards. Or Shaw just scaling dramatically in a lane by himself, or in that lane with the 10 Rings is something that can be really solid. It does have also a pretty decent base power at a 3-5 for Shang-Chi himself. So that's actually not too shabby for the card. And it's a non-toxic Shang Chi card. It's not just a tech, boom, you have 10 power, you're done, kind of card. It's a more less toxic Shang Chi card. It's just I'm just going to scale in power kind of Shang Chi card, opposed to, oh no, I'm the fun police kind of Shang Chi. As we look at the bad for this card, though, it does take up a draw. Like Quicksilver does, except this kind of feels a bit worse. Just because Quicksilver, you're already playing in your deck and you're playing a 12-card deck. This being a game start ability and taking up a draw makes it feel like you're playing a 13-card deck. Because the 10 rings are the 13th card, where you still have, 12 cards also in the deck. You have, the 10 rings as one that takes up your draw and doesn't, start in your deck. Or, it's like added in a sense to your deck, which kind of feels bad there. Also, if Shang-Chi, you're not able to draw Shang-Chi and Shang-Chi isn't played, you only get that on reveal to go off one time, pretty much. So you're only able to get that +1 power to a card one time, and that's probably going to be a bit of a feels bad there. And, the tokens have low base power, a 2/1 for it to be that on reveal, which if you don't get that Shang-Chi in time, there's definitely a world where it gets hit by a Deafening Chord or hit by a Red Guardian before you get that Shang-Chi out to be able to truly unlock the potential of the card, And even at a 2/2, that's also a pretty low power card there, and it's still within range for Deafening Chord. Definitely still within range for something like a Red Guardian, which I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot more of those two this week. Of course, depending on how many people get Shang-Chi and stuff as well, I thought we'd be seeing a lot more Stardust this week. But we honestly didn't see as much Stardust as I thought we would, because people are just still playing Shu Lao, so they didn't necessarily care about Fin Fang Foom. Even though Fin Fang Foom was very fun, and I really enjoyed him in the Pixie List. The Pixie List was a lot of fun, which you guys need to check out that video, which, if you guys haven't, it is on the channel here. But yeah, that is kind of the bad here for Shang-Chi. As we do look at the floor and the ceiling for this card, the floor for this, of course, is this is a late draw, like drawing Shang-Chi. So you're only able to get value potentially from the 10 rings if you have another card on the board to be able to give, the 10 rings, giving that +1 to that just other card on the board. But I do think, on average, the base 10 rings is played and you're able to buff one card without it being, unlocked. And then you're able to unlock it and you're able to buff cards for 1 to 2 turns after that with end of turn ability, giving you some pretty solid value, of course, depending on how many cards are in that lane. With the unlocked 10 rings, I think that's still pretty solid. But I think on your complete high end here, you play the 10 rings out on 2, and you would Clea out on 1. You play it onto the Clea lane. Turn 3, you play Shang-Chi, and then Clea gets the end of turn buff, of course, from the 10 rings on turn 3, and then you'll have turn 4, 5, and 6. So you'll have 4 turns additionally, including turn 3, to be able to get that buff on those cards in that lane, if you do get the perfect curve in that sense. And I think that can be pretty solid to scale really, really well, of course, depending on what style of decks you're playing, which is why when we're talking about styles of decks here, the main deck I'm, of course, to start off with is pretty much the Shu Lao Scarlet Spider deck. I have not really been playing a lot of this, but I think there is a potential home for this card in this style list, giving that Scarlet Spider a buff, giving Maverick a buff, giving Clea buffs as well, giving Kitty Pryde buffs will be solid too. It's another good card that can get really just help you scale more with additional buffs there on the Kitty Pryde and everything too. And since you already start with a 2 cost, you don't have to play this 2 cost necessarily tempo on turn 2. It gives you something you can always potentially play with another 1-drop on turn 3 to get some of those Shu value procs as well. And you have a bunch of different 1 costs in here to get Lockheed value. Joaquin Torres with the Flames of Faultine or with Majestic Wingbeat can be solid. Even with some of the Merlin skills, you can use Joaquin for that to give you some value as well. There's a bunch of just different options that I like in this list, and I think that this will fit fairly well in it. The next list we have here is going to be a Surfer list. It's kind of got some tech in here. We have Copycat and Killmonger as some of those tech pieces. We're not running any 1-drops ourselves, but Killmonger, honestly, I'm not seeing a lot in the meta. But I think people are playing a good variety of just different 1-drops, whether it is a Kitty Pryde or whether it is still hoods and demons and stuff. I feel like you can get some decent Killmonger value right now, especially in some of these Zombie Galacti decks too. Being able to hit some of those cards that would be transforming into Zombie Galacti cards, getting them off the board so they don't have that value is really nice. And then also, like I said, we have Captain Carter, we have Shaw, we have Maverick as at least 3 of those cards that can get values from the 10 rings, whether it is end of turn or just maybe that additional proc as well. Surge to be able to get some of these cards out maybe early or have them have additional benefits of power, which is really nice, as well as Viv to be able to buff all other cards in our hand and get some value that way. Same with Gwenpool. Being able just to have different kind of targets, and this is kind of what my thought process is when it comes to the Surfer style deck, which I think can actually potentially play pretty well. It really just depends on how bad the draw effect is on Shang-Chi for you to be able to hit your curse. Because sometimes you're going to be able to hit what you want to hit, and then other times you're just not going to be able to draw what you want to draw, potentially because of the 10 rings. And then with our last list over here, it's pretty much a slam deck. We, of course, have Mockingbird and Sasquatch. The 10 rings are a token card, so that does, of course, benefit your Mockingbird. And then Sasquatch, you're playing a bunch of different 1-drops and, Mysterios and stuff to be able to get Sasquatch to be cheaper. And then, of course, Shu Lao is just fantastic. So we have Shu Lao in here to be able to buff the last character you played. And then you have Lockheed for all the different 1-drops from either the Merlin skills, the Kate Bishop arrows, Kitty Pride, Wingbeat, Agony, and stuff to be able to get value there from Lockheed, and just playing out a variety of just different cards to be able to get value, even potentially for your Hitmonkey. So that's kind of some of the general gist of that over here. With that in mind, as we do look at Shang-Chi, I do think this card has some strength. If you can get that, the potential, and you get those draws, I definitely think you can really kind of scale well this card. But with that in mind, I'm not necessarily certain if this is a card you want to kind of auto-include in a bunch of different decks. I do think it's going to have more homes than maybe I'm giving it credit for, but I don't necessarily think this card is the most flexible type of card. I think people also are going to be pretty low on it too because of the way it takes away a draw like Quicksilver does. But if this card does underperform, this definitely seems like a focal card to be adjusted. Well, I do have it at a 1-star here. There is definitely a world where they do change this to make it so it doesn't take up an additional draw, or take up a draw, and you're able to get an additional draw. With this kind of more so like an Agatha kind of situation, I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of happens with Shang-Chi, depending on how this performs. I think that would be the first change they do, opposed to giving the 10 rings themselves power or extra power. But with that in mind, I do think Shang-Chi is going to be a bust. Unfortunately, I do think that unless you really, really want this card or enjoy this style card, I would probably skip it. And I would say for potentially stuff in February or for cards in March. I just think right now this is just not looking great on paper. And it's just probably not something I would necessarily get at the moment. If you want to stay collection complete, you can totally feel free to invest in this card. But I just... taking away that extra draw, I think, at the beginning of the game is probably one of the worst things that can happen that makes this card bad. If it did not take up the first draw, this card would be good. But since it does take up the first draw, I think that's what really just nukes this card, essentially. But I do want to say, every video, right, guys? At the end of the day, I could totally be wrong about this card. I am theory crafting for this card. So, this is without knowing how the meta is truly going to shake up with Shang-Chi. This is before the OTA that's going to be happening on Thursday. This is before maybe there's other combo pieces I haven't thought about, with Shang-Chi, which, I want you guys to let me know. What other combo pieces have you guys been thinking about with Shang-Chi to be able to get some of that, extra value that I'm not really, thinking of and everything, too? Because, sometimes... these cards don't work the way I believe or the way we all believe until we actually get to see it. We don't get to test these cards. So this is all just before we get to know anything about them. So just kind of, keeping that in mind. And, bad cards do get buffed and good cards get nerfed. And so do good cards get buffed and bad cards get nerfed. So, at the end of the day, Second Ender does a pretty good job at balancing a lot of things, too. So just kind of, keep that in mind. If cards are underperforming and it's kind of a key focal kind of card or kind of character, there's a world where they kind of buff them. So, just kind of keep that in mind. They want to sell these cards. We're playing a card game. They want to make money. So I wouldn't be surprised maybe this card does underperform if they do buff this card. But, at the end of the day, spend your guys' resources the way you guys want to, This is a card game we're playing for fun, to be entertained, and to have a good time. So, definitely, keep that in mind when it comes to the way you want to play this game, and whatever's going to bring you joy, do what brings you joy. And I say thank you guys so much for watching the video today. And, if you enjoyed the video, definitely feel free to like, comment, hit the notification bell, and subscribe if you're new. It's been real. God bless, and Tucker out.